wind-up torches, tinned meat and bottles of water. They're just some of the items that the government are advising people to stock up on as it urges the public to prepare for emergencies. Scouts Honour, be prepared. A new website called Prepare has been launched by the government to advise the public on what steps they can put in place in case of a variety of emergencies. Now, is this necessary, folks, or is this yet again more scaremongering from the government? Well, joining me to discuss this further is the author and journalist Julie Cook. Julie, thank you very much for your time today. Now, Julie, I'm looking at some of the items there, and it says you need a penknife. Now, I've never used a penknife in my life, to be quite honest with you. I wouldn't know where to start. So are they just on a hiding to nothing here?
Well, hi, Darren. First of all, I think, they said don't stockpile, don't panic buy. But the first thing people are going to do when they hear this kind of advice is to go and panic buy. And lots of things go through your head. Is it the war? Is it the threat of nuclear war from Russia? Is it the Ukraine disaster? Is it what's happening in Palestine and Israel? There's so much going on in the world to make us afraid. But is it really that, or is it more about compliance and kind of Project Fear Mark II? And I'm veering more towards that. I'm thinking, there's a general election called exactly the same time. And if there's any way to make the public behave and comply, it's to make them afraid.
Yes, I mean, we have gone through years of a mission creep, I guess, by successive governments into a more liberal sphere. I mean, is this part of a wider agenda, or do you think this is just common sense? And as I say, Scouts Honour, be prepared. I was taught that as a kid. Is it not just common sense and wise to actually prepare for all scenarios?
I think it's common sense. I think, most of us do have a few batteries in the cupboard or a candle or, a tin opener, for example. I think they are common sense. But I think by making a Be Prepared website and announcing it at the exact same time as a general election it's so much more than that. Yes, let's be prepared, but there's something else going on here. And it seems to me that general underlying sense of unease, anxiety that kind of keeps us compliant.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the logo that we've just had on screen there, for those that may be listening on radio, how would you prepare in massive letters, that capital bolding, really emphasising that word prepare. It's sort of, it reminds me a bit of George Orwell, dare I say. It might as well say Big Brother says, how would you prepare for an emergency? Am I going too far?
No, I don't think you are. And I think, as I said, Project Fear 2, we've all lived through all of this with 2020 and the pandemic. And interestingly, in which we were told not to panic buy and stockpile when we kind of needed to. And now that there is no immediate defined threat, as I said, there are lots of threats, but nothing defined, we're told, right, go and get all this stuff. And, I think people have just had enough of being spoken down to and told to do the obvious. But equally, as I say, the timing doesn't escape most people's notice, with Rishi Sunak announcing this snap general election in July, which, has shaken everybody. To have this at the same time, as you say, with the big logo, the big website, it's fishy to me, Darren. It's fishy.
Well, fishy Rishi, that's what some people are calling him, Julie. But I mean, surely though, after the pandemic, right, do you remember when everyone was rushing out of the shops and the shops were bare because people were stockpiling all sorts of loo roll? There were shortages of loo roll, and the loo roll companies, manufacturers had to say, hang on a minute, we're not running out of loo roll, calm down. But actually, to avoid scenarios like that, is this just natural preparedness for eventualities that may arise? I mean, goodness only knows what could happen, but all eventualities ought to be considered, especially if you're, for example, someone with a young family.
Yes, of course. As I say, common sense. But most of us do have common sense. I think there's a sense of being talked down to a little bit, having some tins in the cupboard, having a tin opener, having some batteries and a torch. I'd say pretty much most of us have a few of those items anyway. But what interested me was it was the 3 days worth of food. And I think that's what's got people talking and panicking, because it's kind of like, well, if there's a nuclear disaster, it doesn't matter whether you've got 3 days or 30 days, you know,
Yes.
it's game over, frankly. But if it's any other kind of disaster, I don't know, flooding, electricity problems, whatever, I mean, really, is 3 days of tins the answer? I think we live in such a sophisticated society now that's so dependent on technology, internet, phone. You know, for example, you mentioned the wind-up radio. Well, how are we going to get the radio now that pretty much all of radio is digital anyway?
Yes.
You know, they have the juice to get their programs out for us to get to. So, yes, it all just seems very obvious common sense, and yet there's no real defined threat of what it is we're meant to be prepared for. And I think that's what's getting people anxious.
All right, Julie, there, thank you very much for that analysis on the preparedness that the government is shouting in capital letters. Julie Cook there. Now, we're going to read out a statement from His Majesty's government who say this. The information on this site is designed to help you prepare for emergencies, be more informed about hazards, and get involved in activities to support yourself and your community before, during, and after an emergency. There's also specific advice for disabled persons and carers. Taking action now will make it easier to manage if an emergency does happen. Well, what say you at home? Do you actually view this as yet more scaremongering, or do you think actually, calm down, Darren, you're being a bit conspiratorial? We'll see what Georgia Gillenly thinks, or as well, the freelance journalist who still joins me in the studio. When you were reading all of this, because we're being told to print out a list of numbers.
I've not printed out.
Have you printed off a list of numbers? Did you dash and say, well, my phone might die of battery, so all these other things might happen? Preparing for all eventualities. Have you done it?
No, I think
haven't.
if I had children or something, I think it'd be something that was more at the front of my mind. I agree that governments instilling fear in people makes people more compliant, which can be useful for governments. However, our current government, I don't think they could organise the proverbial in a brewery. I don't think it's coordinated that this was released, and there's also a general election. I don't think it's coordinated at all. There's no evidence of that. I think to an extent it can be seen as patronising, but I also think that, as we're saying, with things being so digital now, you're saying, oh, most people might have a torch in their house. I don't actually have that.
And
I just use my phone.
To be honest,
so many
Georgia,
things.
The amount of people that couldn't afford to get 3 days of supplies on top of their weekly shop.
Yeah, that's a lot, actually. I probably have maybe not even a day or something, depending. But I think people who may be a bit older, they have their own houses. When you have a house, things just accumulate. Like my parents' house, for example.
Absolutely.
We have
the
stuff,
space.
If you're living in a flat in London, you're a young person.
Exactly.
You don't just have loads of kind of emergency things or lots of food, that kind of thing. I think the government might be aware that people sort of our age are a bit less prepared.
And a lot of people may well be saying this proves that they're all a bit out of touch, to be perfectly honest. But Georgia, thank you very much for your company today. That's freelance journalist there, Georgia Gillenly.